Hey everyone, welcome back to Fix It TV, and we're back with another video about Interbellum, the new Warhammer online private server that would be launching at some point. More information are coming available, and because of that we're here to talk about hard specializations. Before we move on, I would like to say that please listen to the following things I have to say so there will be no confusion about what we are going to talk about. Number one, we're going to talk about what you know as paths or trees in the game. And now they're called hard specializations or game loops. So a lot of the terminology is changing. So I don't want you to get lost when you start the game. You're going to have three different ones. This is for the Rune Scribe, also known as the Rune Priest. So the Rune Scribe is going to have three hard specializations. The previous left, middle, and right path, which are now called game loops. As you can see, they're completely different from the other two versions of the game. You'll have to specialize on this. So you pick one, you cannot pick one and a few points from the middle, a few points from the other path, the other game loop. You only pick one. That's why they're called hard specializations. Also, they're called hard specializations because you cannot change at any given time. You have to spend some sort of a currency, which hasn't been determined yet, if you want to move from the Rune Lord to the Rune Priest or the Rune Smith, respectively. Now, hard because there's also the soft specialization, which refers to if you pick the first path, the first game loop, the Rune Lord, and you put your 31 points in there, you can change them at any war camp, and you can leave one skill, pick another one if you want, so you can change a little bit your gameplay on the fly. So that's like the soft specialization. The hard is the actual block, the game loop itself that you choose. So let's go now and see race by race and class by class how the classes are changing, what its hard specialization is, because we have a lot of different things which some of you will love and some of you will hate. So let's go and see them. We're going to start with left, right, order destro, as they are on the character creation screen, starting with Dwarfs, going to Greenskins, Empire, Chaos, High Elves, Dark Elves, which also have some different names. Also, please note that some of the names or specializations are placeholders and they will be changing. So let's start with the Dwarfs. What we knew as Iron Breakers are now going to be called Dwarf Warriors. So when you make a character, you'll have to choose Dwarf Warrior. The three hard specializations for the Dwarf Warriors are Iron Breakers, which is going to be your standard tanks with heavy focus on the armor, and they equip axes and shields. Here you have to note that they will only equip axes and shields. There won't be any one-handed hammers or anything else. Then the second specializations will be hammers. They are melee DPS that sacrifice mobility for additional defenses. They equip two-handed hammers. So far we do have the two standard things that we know as we know them. The third hard specialization is going to be Longbeards, and they are standard tanks with a little more offensive support for their team. They equip two-handed axes. This means that they're going to be like a tank, but they're going to have more buffs, offensive buffs, to support the group. This is the only change there. So we'll see how that's going to work. The next one is the Engineers. Here we also have some changes. Riflemen are range burst DPS. There's no specific as in single target or AoE so far. As far as we know, all the specialization will have both. So we need to play the game and see how that's going to work. When pushed, they lose sustained damage. They equip spanners and rifles and deploy gun turrets. Here's some new information about the Engineer. They deploy gun turrets. There's no mention about any other turret as we did before, which you could deploy either of the three turrets anytime you wanted. They're only going to have gun turrets. Number two that changes is in the phrasing itself, range burst DPS. When pushed, they lose sustained damage. I can tell you this, according to what they've said, the Engineer doesn't anymore needs to be tied to the turret, which means you don't have to be 20 feet or 60 feet from your turret to receive some of the buffs. We'll see the details when the game is released. This means that you're a range burst DPS and you have sustained damage, but if you're pushed and you move away from your turret, you lose your sustain. You're probably going to maintain your burst. So this is an entire different gameplay for the Rifleman, also known as the Sniper. Grenadiers are mobile medium range DPS focused on spreading multiple effects. They equip spanners and rifles and have no deployables. This means the bombardment turret is gone from the game completely. The grenadier is going to be most likely AoE effect buffs, debuffs, because it says spreading. There's no deployable, which means you're medium range mobile. You're just not tied up to anything. Probably will have all your buffs in advance. Also, new gameplay there. And Tinkerers, which is the brand new thing, and you know how much I love playing defensive, they are non-standard tanks, not defensive engineers, not tanky DPS. They are actually tanks. So they are not standard tanks, whose effects are related to their deployable devices. They equip spanners and rifles and deploy lightning rods, kegs, and magnets. What does it mean by non-standard tank? It means that you don't have a guard, you don't have a shield, but you're still a tank. You're a tank because of your armor. You're a tank because you use, in this case, your deployables and other means to defend your group. Increase armor, increase toughness, reduce incoming damage, healing debuffs, so on and so forth. And probably because you're using your deployables, you're probably going to have area of effect for defending. So also something we have to wait for the gameplay to see how 100% is going to work. But we have rifleman, grenadier with no turret, medium range, AoE, buff, debuff, probably builds, and a tank. We have more classes that have more tank builds and more healers in the game now. So this is the first one we see as a tank, completely changed the third old tree. Then we're moving on to Oathbreakers, which are the Slayers as you know them. We're going to have, again, as in everything, 3 specializations. Skaven Slayers are melee DPS with focus on cleave damage, therefore AoE, and range and rage generation. They have dual yielded axes. Then you're going to have the Exiled, which are non-standard tanks. Yes, you heard this correct. Slayer is a non-standard tank on this version. With periods of improved damage, they dual yield hammers. So your DPS AoE has dual yield axes. Your non-standard tank Slayer has dual yielding hammers. I know you're going to have a lot of questions, but until they release more information, we can't say exactly how this is going to work or what does periods of improved damage means. So let's hear the information and let's wait a little bit for more to come out. Giant Slayers are melee DPS with a focus on combo effects and bloodthirst generation. They equip 200 axes. So we see now that we have the 200 version of the Slayer. It looks like all 3 paths are now being utilized in one way or the other so far. I am not sure what bloodthirst generation is over rage generation. It may be the same mechanism with a different name or just something completely different. We need to wait a little bit more to get details, but it looks like they are trying to get all 3 specializations to be viable and to be playable. And finally, we have the Rune Scribe, which we also talked about on the open mic roundtable, where they also show us a little bit of the trees and the builds. So here, the Runes Priests are renamed into Rune Scribes and have 3 specializations. Rune Lords are melee hybrid offensive support with high focus on improving allied damage output. They equip 200 hammers. We have the first melee Rune Priest. Rune Priest, as a specialization, are ranged healers that are more dwarf of all trades. They equip stuffs. I think this will go closer to the version we know. Runesmiths are melee hybrid defensive support with a plethora of allied buffs. They equip a single one-handed hammer. So the old Rune Priest, which now it's called Rune Scribe, is a melee hybrid with offensive support to buff your group to do more damage, or a defensive support melee again to reduce incoming damage and buffs for the allies, and the standard healer, which is called the Rune Priest. A lot of changes on the Dwarfs, tank engineer, tank slayer, melee Rune Priest. So it's exciting for some people may not like it, but we'll see how that's going to play out. So let's go now and see how the greenskins are doing. Greenskins, they also receive a lot of changes. Let's start with the Blackorcs, which now they're going to be called Blackorcs, and the specializations are fighters which are standard tanks which are always in thick of things. They can swap to their backup weapon for periods of offensive potential. They equip swords and shields with a two-handed axe backup. This is something completely new. It reminds me a little bit of the mechanisms with Counter on New World, where you have two weapons and you switch between them with a whole new set of skills. Here it looks like you're going to be a tank as you were before, your sword and your shields in the front lines, but you will have some sort of a period or a cooldown which you can switch to two-handed and output more damage, and then you can switch back to your sword and shield, which will definitely create a new gameplay, and it sounds a lot more active and more interesting. War bosses, the second specialization, are defensive supports that keep enemies fighting them rather than runs. They equipped axes and shields with a two-handed backup, two-handed axe backup. Defensive support so far, from what they explained, said before, is a melee where you have buffs that you buff your defenses of your entire group, making them more survivable. And then we have the Butchas, which are melee DPS bruisers with a good damage and defense with a little mobility. They swap between cleave and burst. They dual yield axes with a two-handed axe backup. The whole mechanism of second weapon as a backup seems to be in all three specializations, but they will feel a little bit different. Butcher seems to be more of a probably two-handed DPS tank as we know it, with a little bit of a twist. So Black Ops have received a major overhaul on the gameplay, but I think their functions will still be pretty much the same as before. Then we go to the boys. The boys. This is the choppers, as we know it, and the three specializations are big unts, which are melee DPS focused on hitting as many of them as they can. They do yield swords. Remember, you can only have one style of weapon, which also is used to identify what build you're playing. I think this is your normal chopper as we know it before. Our boys are hybrid ranged fighters that hit harder range, then when they don't miss, and finish them off in melee. They equip a single sword and have a bow. This looks like the chopper now has something similar to the Shadow Warrior, a sword and a bow. So we'll see how that's going to work. I'm assuming because it's a hybrid range fighter and has one sword and a bow, it looks like a Shadow Warrior version there. And Big Wa are caster DPS that go boom, but they are limited and fight in melee when their magic is depleted. They equip stuffs. This sounds a little bit more on the specialization we talked in the previous video, and we'll see further on the Empire of the sword yielding melee sorcerer builds or specialization. So the choppers are really getting something completely different. Bow and sword like a Shadow Warrior, and then we have something that resembles maybe the Bright Wizard or the Shaman play with a twist of melee. Then we got Goblins. Goblins is the Squig Herders, and the three specializations include Squig Herder as a name, which are offensive supports with a variety of different squigs. They also summon additional uncontrolled basic squigs throughout the fight. It looks like they've been converted to something of a summoner that you can spawn extra basic squids, which you don't control, but I'm assuming they're going to run out to enemies and do damage. They equip a single spear and summon pets. So they've been converted, one of the specializations, to some sort of a pet summoner. Shotas are DPS that prefer to run away and be at range, but corner them in melee and prepare to get stabbed. They equip a spear and a bow. This sounds pretty much like the standard run and shoot that we had before in the other versions. Probably will have some twists on the builds, on the paths themselves, but gameplay looks like the one we know. And Squig Riders are non-standard, highly mobile tanks that cannot always tank. They equip spears and shields, go into mid-ball form, have a pet when not in form. So the third specialization of the Squig, it seems like we have the melee, the mid-ball as we call it, and it's going to be a tank, a non-standard tank. There isn't any more information to derive from this, but Squigs also got an overhaul, a summoner, a run and shoot bow, and a tank on melee form. Finally, we have the Night Goblins, which is the shamans that we know in the previous versions. Their specializations are little wags, which are offensive support that specialize in sneaky style magic effects. They equip stuffs. I don't know what that means, the sneaky part, I really don't. Stalkers are melee DPS with magical infusions and stealth. Yes, you heard it right, stealth. You get a stealth shaman on this version. They equip a single ritual dagger. So melee DPS with magical infusions and stealth. I would say this resembles the brew build of the Witch Elf, where you have your melee DPS and you do magical infusions where you do corporeal damage. Maybe they were doing elemental damage, and you have the stealth. So it looks like the shaman getting a stealth. And then you have the Shroomancers, which are healers, which use the power of tasty mushrooms to heal people at locations. They equip stuffs. I would like you to point out the word at locations. It looks like they're getting a lot more of ground AoE healing, if my interpretation is correct. So the shaman is also being retrofitted completely, where you have a offensive support with magic effects, sneaky ones. You got a stealth shaman with a dagger that infuses magic onto the daggers. Sounds like a Witch Elf style. And a healer with more AoE, because it says locations. We'll see a little bit more how that works. So let's go now and see how the Empire got transformed. Empire characters also have been changed severely, which I have to say at this point I feel this is a brand new game that has nothing to do with the other two versions completely, except maybe the graphics and the areas. So starting the Empire with a Bright Wizard, we have 3 specializations, as we said in every class. Pyromancers, which are ranged burst DPS and focus on combo effects while at high combustion. Mobility is attached to spending combustion. They equip stuffs. This is your usual Bright Wizard as we know it. Arsonists are hybrid ranged DPS that build combustion with ranged dots and spend combustion with high potency melee attacks. They equip a single arming sword. This is a frontline dot Bright Wizard. And then we have Battle Wizards, which are ranged offensive support, I'm just trying to emphasize some of the words, that dispel enemy effects, remove their defenses, and punish healers. They equip stuffs. This is something completely new, because they're going to be buffing the friendlies, they're going to be debuffing the enemies, so there's more damage output, there's more damage received by enemies, and it says something about punishing healers. I wonder if this is a ranged spellcasting version of a Blackguard who specializes on attacking specifically casters. This is something for the healers. The second class on Empire we have is Squire. This is the Knights of the Blazing Sun, been renamed as Squire. Their 3 hard specializations are Captains, which are standard tanks that provide defensive auras to the team. They equip arming swords and shields. Pretty much what we know. Order of Glinding. Glinding Steel is a standard tank that provides utility auras to the team. They equip 2-handed swords. Note here that between the Captains and the Order of Glinding Steel, it seems that they have split the auras to defensive auras on the standard tank and utility auras on another standard tank. So they're broken to do different play styles, defensive auras, utility auras. So you can have both of them. You're going to have to make a bit of a choice there. And the Order of the Gliding Steel is 200 swords, no shields. So you get the damage, but you get utility over defense. And Knights of the Blazing Sun, which is the 3rd specialization, are melee offensive support, who, you guessed it, provide offensive auras to the team. They equip 200 swords. So here you have now 2-handed specializations, one with utility auras, one with offensive auras, and then a standard tank with a defense. So full defense and 2-handed specializations, one with utility, one with more offense. We'll see how they're going to be used in groups and warbands, but we have a bit of a long way until we get there. Swordsmen, that is your Witch Hunters. Witch Hunters also have 3 hardcore specializations. First one called Witch Hunters are melee DPS that focus on stealth-based attacks. They equip rapier and pistol. Again, your standard as you know in the previous versions. Free Company Militia are melee DPS that focus on sustained damage without stealth. So the second specialization removes stealth from the Witch Hunters, and you become a normal melee DPS with sustained damage. They equip a rapier and an arming sword. This looks like maybe a version of Slayer Chopper with a dual yield there. Outriders are medium-range offensive support that suppress enemies with a hail of gunfire while being highly mobile. They equip arming swords and rifles. I honestly don't know what category this falls. Doesn't have a stealth, so Witch Hunters now have only one path with stealth. But I think that the Outriders also fall somewhere near the the Shadow Warrior builds. So instead of a bow, you get a rifle, and then you have, instead of a rapier or something, you have an arming sword. We'll need more details in that and explore those builds. But the Witch Hunter has nothing to do with the one we knew, except maybe the first specialization. So the stealth is only one path, the other two don't have stealth, and you get some new things to play with. And finally, for the Empire, we have the Warrior Priest. We still call the Warrior Priest. The first hardcore specialization is Silver Hammer. It's a melee healer that uses life taps with a mix of ranged absorbs. They equip hammers and shields. Anvil and Torch is a ranged defensive support that provides absorbs on hit effects and cleanses for the party. They equip hammers and tomes. And final specialization, Cleansing Flame, is a melee DPS that consumes their resources for periods of high burst. That same resource powers the defenses though. They equip 200 hammers. It looks like we still have the same kind of style. It looks like the healer is completely gone from the way we know it. So we have the melee healer with life taps and a range absorb. We kind of see what this is about. The second specialization, range defense support. I don't remember them having a lot of range spells, but that could have changed. And Cleansing Flame, I think that finally the Warrior Priest is getting a proper DPS path, specialization, and build, call it what you like. It looks like they're going to get a proper DPS build, which it was missing from the game for a very long time. So, next on the list, Chaos. So, on Chaos, let's start with the Chosen. First specialization, Blight Kings, standard tanks that become more tanky as they spread Nargle's love. They equip hammers and shields. It looks like the more you spread your auras or your debuffs, the stronger you get. Maybe it looks like a tank leech mechanism there. Gore Chosen are melee DPS with high sustained damage and good defenses, but low mobility. They equip 200 axes. I also would like to point out on this point, low mobility, high mobility. I am not 100% sure if how that works. We still need some information there, if there is some sort of a speed buff, or, you know, slower movement. What exactly does that mean? It's not been clarified yet, but be patient. Information coming out weekly, daily, you know. And then we have Tints, sorry I never said that one correct, are defensive support with a mix of medium range magic and crowd control. They equip 200 swords. So I don't see anywhere the mention of auras. It looks like Chosen have lost their auras. They get 3 specializations that are completely different one to the other. Not sure about the gameplay here. One, that when you spread, I suppose, some sort of disease or debuffs, you get stronger as a tank, which is the standard one. And then you have a melee DPS with high sustain and good defenses. And then you get another one, which is defensive support with medium range magic and crowd control. So it seems you get more of a combat control there, but no auras. I don't know how many people are going to be happy losing the auras on the Chosen. However, there's a lot of people who are going to be very happy about the Zealot, which now it's called the Cultist. Zealots are ranged healers that transfer their health to their allies and drain it from their enemies. They equip ritual daggers and fetishes. A Lich life tap mechanism where you transfer your own health to heal on your allies, which means at the same time you have to DPS somewhere else to restore your own life. I'm not sure if there's a mechanism that this path can be used to heal without DPSing someone. So this looks like a ranged version of the dock where you can use your own blood or you have to DPS to heal. A little bit more difficult and more interesting. Then we got Hedons, are defensive support with spread corruption effects among their allies. They equip swords and fetishes. Some sort of a buff debuff situation there, more of a support. It doesn't show any healing, but maybe there is. Maybe heals on hit or something like that. Slaughter Priests are sustained damage hybrid range magical DPS that favor melee and reveal in the blood of the enemies. They equip axes and fetishes. Looks like here's the big difference between the Rune Scribe, the Rune Priest that we knew before, with the Cultist, the Zealot as we know it before, where the Rune Priest gets 2 melee specializations for defense and support and a ranged healer. The Zealot seems to be getting a support buff for the group, a melee, a mixture between melee ranged spellcasting DPS, so it does now have a DPS, which doesn't exist on the Rune Priest, and the healing mechanism has changed completely. Since we're talking about the healers, and we're going to see some more healers, I have to say that the healers so far, they feel a lot more active. And what I mean is we don't seem to have that standstill spam AoE, do a hot and a shield and you're done. Also, at this point, I'd like to say one more thing about all the classes. As an Easter egg here, somewhere in the middle of this video, Detaunt as we knew it, it doesn't exist anymore. It has been replaced with an damage reduction ability, more like the ability the Rune Priest had before, where you receive 50%, for example, less damage from everything, not just at 30 feet or 40 feet. Any enemy hitting you from 300 feet to 0 feet, you get damage reduction, but you also output the same amount of damage, which means if you receive 50% less damage, you're also doing 50% less damage for the duration. So you can't just detaunt somebody and kill them. It's more of a trade-off. And most of the things in the builds here and the specializations are a trade-off. You want more defense, you lose DPS. You want more DPS, you lose defense. You want more crowd control, you become more susceptible yourself, and so on and so forth. So the Magus is also completely different from the Engineer in many aspects. The Soul Flyers are ranged caster DPS which summon immobile pets and launch nukes downfield until they go insane. Probably a new mechanism there that does something the more you DPS. Maybe like the Bright Wizard, you blow up yourself, you go insane, something. They equip staffs and have Seekers of Slanesh. Poxbringers are ranged caster DPS which summon mobile pets and spread disease and corruption among enemy ranks. They equip staffs and have Nurglings. It looks like we're getting a version of a lion or a squig, if you like, on the Poxbringer build for the Magus, the specialization. So you remain a ranged spellcaster, but you have a mobile pet. We'll see if it's a different pet. It's the same demons and they have now a new animation to follow you around. We don't know, we will see. And it looks like it's an AoE build since you spread disease around. Final specialization for the Magus, Doomweaver. Are medium range defensive supports that focus on CC, they equip staffs and they have blue horrors. It doesn't specialize blue horrors are mobile or immobile. Blue horror was, I believe, the close range pet for the Magus. So the Magus now have a long range nuking build. It has a mobile pet, AoE with corruption and debuffs, and a medium range CC. It looks like a lot of the classes get a specialized crowd control path or specializations, which makes me wonder if crowd control is going to be something that's going to be properly utilized on Interbellum server, something that wasn't really properly utilized on the Age of Reckoning and on Return of Reckoning, where people say, no, forget about this, let's go full DPS, we're good. Here, it looks like they're trying to put everything into place, so you're going to need pure DPS, support DPS, defensive DPS, offensive DPS, maybe supportive tanks, non-standard tanks. There's going to be a lot more interaction and a lot more formations and confirmation of warbands and parties to play with. And since we said this, the balance of this, and you should be aware of this, is very important. They've announced that the balance of this game will be based on warband versus warband. They're not going to base it on 1v1 or 6v6 or anything like that. So there is a chance that some of the classes or paths won't perform very well in 1v1 in small groups, and you might have to adjust that with a different class or a different specialization. The balance will be only on warband versus warband. And final class for Chaos is the Marauder, which in the previous version has been underplayed and in my opinion underestimated by a lot. And mainly for people that didn't understand how to play the Marauder and do the proper stance to get the maximum out of this class. The three new hardcore specializations are Blood Reavers, which are highly mobile burst melee DPS. They dual yield axes. Nargle are the offensive supports which erode the enemy's defenses. They dual yield hammers. And Blade Bringers are non-standard tanks. This is the second tank that we see. The Squig had a new specialization as a tank, and now the Marauder is the second tank with high mobility, and they do yield swords. So the new tanks on Destro side are Squig on melee form and Marauder, and on order so far we have the Engineer. We don't see here any mention of mutations, of stands, or anything like that. So it looks like it's going to be a standard type of melee. Then you're going to have a debuffing offensive support or buffing, because offensive you buff usually your group to do more damage. And then we have standard tanks, sorry, non-standard tank, which means, again, like we mentioned in the Engineer, probably going to buff your group defenses so you keep them alive in that way. So next one is High Elves, followed by the Dark Elves. Let's go and see how they've been transformed, because I think you'll be surprised for the next two races a lot. All right, we're here now on the final two races, which is the High Elves and the Dark Elves, which now are called Asur and Druchii. The Asur, we're going to start with the Archer, also known as a Shadow Warrior, and the first specialization is Shadow Warrior, which is a hybrid ranged DPS, more focused on physical, emphasis on physical ranged abilities. They equip a single-handed sword and a bow. I think this is more like the typical version of the Shadow Warrior we know. The second specialization, Northern Sea Guard, is an offensive support with a couple of defensive support options at the cost of damage. They equip sword, shield, and bow. Shield is here the thing we need to focus a little bit, which will replace in future with one-handed spear when the art assets allow. It looks like we have a completely new gameplay here for the Shadow Warriors. We knew it because the sword and the shield. I think this might be a mixture between the gameplay of the shielded dog and warrior priest without the healing, but more supporting either buffing DPS or diminishing the enemy's defenses can apply. The third path is Shadow Walker, is a hybrid ranged DPS more focused on melee abilities. They have access to stealth, but no mobility. They do yield swords and a bow. I think the Shadow Warrior fans will be pleased that now the Shadow Warrior can dual yield swords. I think it's been a request for a very long time on the Warhammer universe. They also gain stealth, not a shadow step stealth, but it looks like they cannot move, which means you probably can stealth for a long period of time. I hope, since you don't move, and you will be able to ambush people. That's the melee. Remember, I don't know if it's going to be AoE or single target, but from what I know so far, all the classes in every single specialization, they have both skill types available, single target and AoE. Because remember, AoE doesn't do any damage on single target. It doesn't do any significant, not any damage, but I suppose significant damage on one or two targets. You have to hit 3+ for your AoE spells to be useful. So you're gonna have to have both, and what I said, every specialization does have both. The Archmage is also called Archmage, no change there, but the first specialization, Adept of Giron, is a ranged healer with a slight focus on Lord of Life spells. They equip stuffs. So that's your healer, I suppose, the same as before. Adept of Asur is a ranged offensive support with a slight focus on Lord of Heaven spells. They equip stuffs. This, I think, is more of an AoE kind of situation. Adept of Hish is a ranged healer with a slight focus on Lord of Light spells. They equip stuff. Tell you the truth, I like to be honest with you, I'm not sure what the Lord of Light spells are of this, but it looks like they're all on the healing support kind of situation. It looks like the DPS is not going to be there, at least not the way we knew it. Maybe a little bit here on the offensive support. I don't know how many people are happy about that. Moving on to what we knew as Swordmaster, now it's called the Apprentice of Hoeth. The first specialization, which is Commanders, are standard tanks that have above average offensive potential. They equip swords and shields. It looks like the sword and shield version of the Swordmaster gets a buff on their damage. Swordmasters, the second specialization, are magical melee DPS with a handful of basic range spells. They equip 200 swords. It looks like the 200 is changing a little bit by gaining basic range spells. I don't think they had them before. So it's going to be interesting to see what exactly they get when the time comes. And finally, Lore Masters are mid-range defensive supports. They equip stuffs. What Mordheim means, I have no idea, but it was there on the notes. So a few changes here on the Swordmaster. I am looking forward to see how this basic range spells on the second specialization are actually going to work. And I want to see this defensive support. All those support, offensive, defensive, I really want to see those, how they're going to work, and if they're actually going to have some sort of a use in the game, because previous versions didn't really favor crowd control, support, or anything like that. And finally, for the Asur, the previous High Elves, White Lion. White Lion has Hunters, which are burst melee DPS, heavily lacking sustain output, so only burst. They equip 200 axes and an offensive pet. I think this is our standard Lion, but no sustain. Maybe more bursty, but no sustain at all from the looks of things. Guardsmen are non-standard tanks. Here is the other non-standard tank on order. Let's say it's the equivalent of the Marauder version, whose effectiveness is tied to the pet. They equip 200 axes and a defensive pet. So the Lion tank version and non-standard tank version, it looks like it's tied to the pet. I don't know what they're going to do with the pets, guys. I want to be honest here. The pets always had issues, pathing issues, dying easily, and I don't know how the pet's going to be helping the Lion to tank. It's something we're going to have to wait to see. But since we're on the pet situation here because of the Lion tank, let me tell you another information here. Pets will gain the stats and armor and other things from the player. So if you have a tank engineer, for example, or a tank Lion or a tank Marauder and they have a pet, I was told that there's some situation when the pets will be harder to kill than the player themselves. And that goes for the Magus as well, the Squig. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but maybe that's why the tanky situation here on the Lion is tied to the pet, because the pets may be even tankier than the player and they can do the job. Final specialization are the Axemen, which are dot-based melee DPS. They equip 200 axes and no pet. So the Lion gets a normal pet bursty situation. It gets a non-standard tank which is tied to the pet, and we'll see what's going to happen there when more information become available, and a melee dot-based DPS with no pet. I have a feeling we'll see a lot of people trying the non-standard tank, but I think a lot of people might end up on the dot melee DPS because the no sustain here may be a little bit off, you know. And final race, and conclude this video with a bit of summary at the end, the Dark Elves. But prepare yourselves, you're gonna see things you never expected. And here we are near the end with the last race here, the Dark Elves, which been renamed to Druchii altogether, and the Blackguards also been renamed to Bleak Sword. The first specialization is Blackguards and are defensive supports which have a plethora of effects to shut down magic-based enemies. They equip polearms. This looks like is something very, very specific. It does fall within the lore where the Blackguards were designed or created. Second specialization, Dread Knight, are standard tanks which consume the hatred to keep on living. They equip swords and shields. I think this is our standard as we know it from the previous versions of the game. Blackguards. Crosshairs are offensive support that support their allied melee units, the dual yield swords. This feels more like a version of the dual yielding dock on the front lines. And I would surmise that they deal damage and they support other melee next to them with some sort of a shields, buffs, and so on and so forth. It's an overhaul again on 2 out of the 3 builds, paths or game loops as they're called now, for the Blackguard. For the Brides of Cain, this is the new name of the Witch Elves, and I know how many people play Witch Elves on the other private server, how many played on live, but brace yourselves because Witch Elf specialization called Witch Elves are melee DPS designed around many fast hits and on-hit damage. New mechanism there. The dual yield daggers. Death Hags, the second specialization, are offensive supports whose on-hit effects diminish the enemy's defenses, and they dual yield daggers as well. And finally, Hag Queens are defensive supports who restore the vigor of their allies through the blood they collect. They equipped a dagger and a chalice. So, things you didn't notice while I was reading this. Number 1, Witch Elves no longer have stealth. So, stealth is gone. Number 2, you probably didn't notice, is the fact that Witch Elves on the 3rd specialization are healers. It looks like the playstyle of the dog, where you DPS to heal, right, has been moved from the dog to the Witch Elf. These are the 2 major ones. I'm not going to talk about the offensive support with diminishing effects on the enemies. That's something the hand is full of debuffs. But those are the 2 main huge difference. Witch Elves no longer have stealth, and Witch Elves gain a specialization on melee healing. Now, when it comes to stealth, guys, if you reach this far on this video, I will put some information at the end of this. Moving on to the Hagriff, which is your doc, your disciple of Cain, has been renamed to Hagriff. The first specialization is Khanite Assassins. They're melee DPS that focus on stealth attacks, and they equip a single dagger. This is a stealth disciple of Cain. The thing that was moved from the Witch Elf, it's here on this specialization here on the dock. The second specialization, Executioners, are melee DPS that have potent single strike attacks with lesser mobility. They equip 200 swords. So instead of a 200 warrior priest, now we have a 200 sword dock. And finally, the last specializations for the Hagriff is Disciple of Cain, which are medium-ranged healers with a cyclical style. They equip swords and chalices. I think this is our standard DPS healer, as we know it before, but I'm really looking forward to see how the single dagger stealth dock is going to be working there, and also want to see the 200 sword, how much damage they're going to output, and what does exactly lesser mobility means. There's a lot of questions. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long. Final class, the Sorcerer. And for those of you that love the burst, the timestamps, the super dots of the Sorcerer, brace yourselves. Here we go with the new specializations. Dominators of Ulgu are ranged casted DPS that can set up combo points. They equip stuffs. I believe this is your usual Sorc as you knew it, but I would like to mention something for all spellcasters. Instant spells do less damage than channeled or spells that have cast time. When you have a cast time of 2 seconds, for example, you will receive a damage buff. The longer the spell cast is, the bigger the spell amplification buff will be. So if you have, let's say, for example, 1 second cast time, you get 10%. If it's 2, you get 20%. Numbers are my example, not real in the game. Because you don't have to move, so you get more damage because you are immobile. Second specialization, Dominators of Gore are ranged offensive support that increase their allies' effectiveness while they cast. They equip stuff. It looks like while you have casting time, you buff your group. So this is going to be very interesting to see how a Sorc is going to be able, in open field, stand still to keep casting while buffing everybody else during that time. It's very interesting, but I don't know how easy it is to do in a real-time gameplay. And finally, and you didn't see this one coming, I know you didn't see this one coming, Dominators of Shish are ranged healers that use almost exclusively life taps to heal their allies. They equip stuff. Did you see a Sorc becoming a healer? Because I certainly did not, guys. I didn't see this one coming when I was reading this patch notes or information release, not patch notes, information release. I didn't see a Sorc becoming a healer. Full live taps, still staying on the DPS kind of form, but here we have it. That's it. And as promised, a little bit more information about stealth in general. So the new stealth is called Stalk, okay, and it can last up to 5 minutes. I know this sounds terrifying, 5 minutes. We already on previous versions have a lot of problems when it was 1 minute, 1 minute and 30 seconds. So 5 minutes sounds insane. Anyways, let's see what they have to say about this. So it can last up to 5 minutes, right? It sets your AP regeneration to -5. That is not the same as costs 5 AP per second. Don't forget, when you start the game, you have 0 AP regeneration. You have to build that through skills and gear and so on and so forth. So we'll see how big the impact is on that. But from what I've seen, some of the conversations that happen over on Discord, the maximum will be around 45 to 50 seconds, because otherwise you come out of stealth and you have no AP if you stay longer. And somebody can say, yeah, but I'm going to drink an AP potion. Yeah, great, but AP potions have been changed from what I know, and they don't give you instant AP. They increase your regeneration, which means you can't drink and have 200 points and go and attack somebody. You're probably going to have to wait 5-6 seconds to get enough AP to do something decent damage wise. Moving on, Stalk makes you invisible to everyone, even allies. You will send no information to anyone's client, so even allies won't know your HP, and cheat software cannot see you either. So when you go stealth, your friends can't see you, probably cannot target you, cannot heal you, they can't do anything, they don't even know where you are. So being a stealth class is gonna be a totally new experience. First of all, me being a streamer, for example, being around stealth classes, you won't be able to see them because I won't be able to see them, which is good. You can be healed, which means you have to increase your skill level to be careful with AoEs and everything else. At this point, I don't know if AoE damage pulls you out of stealth. I'll have to look into that. So that is a good change in my book anyways. Any ability used will pull you out of stealth, out of Stalk. So you can't do anything while you stealth. You do anything, you come out of it. Stalk has a cast time to go into it, and it can be pushed back if you get damage. It can be interrupted, and it goes on cooldown if this happens. If you are interrupted, it goes on cooldown. You can go into stealth. So far, we know there's only going to be 1 stealth skill, not 2 stealth skills that exist on Return of Reckoning. Stall is a move cast, so you can do while you're moving, but I'll say again, you can be pushed back and interrupted, and if you're interrupted, it goes on cooldown. Stalk has a 45-second cooldown when the buff ends. So you go into stealth, when you come out of it, then you get the cooldown, not before. So you can go into stealth and then that's all counting. You come out of 50 seconds, you have another stealth. And also Witch Hunter and Khanate Assassin, the Doc and the Witch Hunter, which are now the stealth units, have specializations. On their specialization, have ways to reset the cooldown on Stalk. We're waiting for the trees to come out, the new gameplay loops, the hard specializations to come out, so we can see how these skills combine between them and what happens. These changes is something that we have to see how it goes, but the fact that no one can see you, heal you, protect you, it's a good thing in my book, because it's time for people to start learn how to play the game the way it's meant to be, with skill and not just cheese their ways out of a lot of things. So these are the new information out there about hard specializations, how the classes have been changed, how the trees, paths, as we call them, has been changed with the new game loops and hard specializations. Stay tuned. As soon as they release anything new, I'll make another video for you. If you missed anything, check out the previous videos. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you have any questions or anything to correct me if you're part of the team. All this also exists, almost everything, into a write-up on my website, fixitv.live. Visit it, you might find some useful information extra there. See you on the next video, guys. Thank you very much.